Okay, we might make a start and people will join us. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So I'm looking forward to the talk. Just for those who don't know, Tim is my son. He had his first Alexander lesson when he was 7. And he's been interested in the technique ever since. He came to my training course when I was training, and then he's kept up the interest in the Alexander technique. But he was having lessons not with me, but with someone else. And I'll tell you the story. And out of it came an invention. He had done a degree in engineering at Bath University, and then he went to London University College of Art to do a design course. And out of all that came the Vivobarefoot shoes. But he will complete the story. So I'll just hand you over to Tim, and I'll mute my mic. Okay, all right, you're on, Tim.
All right, thanks, Dad. Great to see everyone here on the call. And I think we all have something in common, which we're interested in the Alexander technique and discovering more about it. And for a long amount of time, when I was growing up, maybe, for my whole childhood, I wasn't really interested in knowing what the Alexander technique was. Or maybe I was sort of interested, but could never really figure out what it was for and whether I could use it. And so I kind of knew it helped people with their back. And I had a few Alexander lessons. I was even a guinea pig when Dad was training. But as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, I was much more interested in things. And so for most of the time when Dad was training, I was in the next room watching TV or reading a comic. But I'll just start the presentation here, and then I'll just get into the story in more detail. To tell the story in a bit more detail, I should also say that if you want to check me out on Instagram, my handle is Tims_barefoot_shoes. So feel free to check out that. And so a bit about myself. I grew up in Somerset in England, and as you know, my dad is an Alexander technique teacher. And my early life, I loved playing tennis, and I was also interested in technology. So there's a picture of me and my tennis coach. I used to spend, a lot of hours practicing, learning how to play tennis. I was also interested in movies like Star Wars because I just loved everything to do with technology. And as I grew older, in my sort of late teens, I started to take an interest in what my dad was saying. And it made a lot of sense because he used to say that the school furniture had a big role to play in people's back problems and all sorts of, health issues in the way that they breathe. And in fact, he came to the Alexander technique because he was spending a long time in car seats, sitting in a crooked kind of way. So that was just the backdrop to the story, and it was just kind of that. All of that was just my normal life. There's nothing kind of extraordinary about it. It was just what my dad did is what I did. And whilst I loved playing tennis, I had an ankle injury. This is a really significant thing in my life because every few months I would twist my ankles playing tennis, and that meant that I wouldn't be able to play for maybe 6 weeks, or at least it wouldn't be able to play at the level I wanted to. So in order to demonstrate what this was really like, I'm just going to share a quick video. So there's no audio, but these are a few clips of professional tennis players twisting their ankles. It's something which you don't often see, but it does actually happen surprisingly often. And these injuries are very disruptive. They can put a player out for several weeks, and sometimes they can even end someone's career, because once you've injured your ankle, it can reoccur very easily. And what's actually happening with the ankle twist is that the ligament is being partially or completely torn, and even if it's a small twist, it can be very painful and take a while to heal. So let me just get back to the original presentation. So this was a situation that I had. I had this ongoing injury. I must have twisted my ankles a dozen times, and but you know, I couldn't find a solution up until this point. I graduated from school. I went to the University of Bath. Whoops, let me put it into full screen here. Okay. Yeah, I went to University of Bath. I was studying mechanical engineering, and my specialism was innovation and engineering design. And kind of ironically, I would be sitting at a computer, probably not too dissimilar from this picture that you can see. Not very, you know, well designed situation, I think you can agree. And I was, you know, sitting at computers towards sort of deadline times. I was sitting at them for maybe 14 hours just to get the very best grade that I possibly could. And it took a toll. And what happened was my neck started really hurting, and it was really difficult to work. And I kept waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning with bad neck pain. So it was something that I really needed to sort out. So I spoke to Dad, and he said that the Alexander technique would be a good idea. And so this was probably the first point when I really had something that I could bring to the Alexander technique to help transform and to, you know, resolve the pain. So Dad knew someone. Her name was Colette Lyons, and she I think she's still practicing the Alexander technique, and she's based in Wales. And she used to come up to Bath once a week to this place here. I think you can just see the pointer. So we used to be in this room here. It's quite a small place, but what would happen was she would spend about an hour to an hour and a half with me, which is quite long for an Alexander technique lesson. But we used to do work on lying down, sitting and standing, and also walking. And so we covered lots and lots of ground in each lesson. And pretty quickly, after a few weeks, I had, you know, no more pain, but I carried on the lessons because I was learning so much about how the body worked. And one thing that really struck me was when we did some walking work. And I'm going to switch over, so if you can just bear with me one more time. So on the left-hand side was the kind of after, and on the right-hand side was the before. So as you can see, when I go to take a step, on the right-hand side, what I was doing was I was leaning to the side and putting all my weight onto one leg, sort of sinking down onto the hip socket, and then I was lifting my other leg in order to take a step. And this was very ineffective, and it wasn't really using the plantar flexion, which is what Colette Lyons was trying to teach me to do. So I successfully identified the habit, and I brought in a new means of using my body. And I found that walking could be just this effortless gliding around the room, and I really enjoyed it. And then what would happen was every time we did that exercise, that would be the last thing that we'd do. And then I would put my shoes back on because I was doing this in socks or barefoot, and I would walk home. And what I realized was that my shoes were stopping me from having the full experience that I'd had in the class. And so I decided, well, actually, I think first of all, I brought that up with Colette, and she showed me some shoes that she wore, and they were actually split soles. So I think it's called a jazz shoe, and it's worn by dancers, and it's like a normal trainer, but the sole is in two pieces. so that the two can move independently from each other. And I found that very interesting. And at that point, I started to wonder whether if I wore a shoe like that, maybe I wouldn't have the ankle injuries playing tennis. So what I did, I've got a photo to show you, just one second. So what I did was I took an old pair of tennis shoes and I started cutting away some of the material to make them as flexible as I possibly could. And there's actually a cut. Well, I turned the shoe over and I cut halfway through the sole to give it more flexibility. And I left the other shoe as it was so I could have a comparison between the two. And I went off and played tennis. And after about 10 minutes, it felt really good, much more flexible. But the shoe broke into two pieces after about 10 minutes. But it was my first experiment into how the shoes are affecting my movement and how the shoes are affecting my injury. So this is where my interest started. And this was around about 1999 when I started making these prototypes. So in the next year following that, I went to London and I did a joint course. It was another degree, and this time it was actually a conversion course for people who had studied engineering, and now they were going to be taught about design. So bringing in color and form and ethnography, which is studying people and finding out about how people live their lives and what role can design play in the way people live. So I continued my project and I made this shoe, which was the first prototype which had a thin sole. And what I did is I got an old trainer and I completely cut off the sole and I stripped down all of the upper so that it was as flexible as possible. And I glued on a very thin piece of material for the sole. And this one has actually got a leather sole here. But the very first one that I made, because I didn't have any leather to hand, I just took an old tennis racket cover and I cut that up so that I could immediately go out and test my idea. And I remember walking up and down outside the college, and it was like I'd performed a magic trick because no one was looking at my feet. I felt like I was wearing socks, but to everyone else, I was wearing some kind of a shoe. And so this shoe is one of the first moments where I felt like I was onto something. I started playing tennis in shoes like this and quickly realized that my ankle injury was not reoccurring. And so it gave me a lot of enthusiasm to carry on and develop more and more of these kinds of shoes. This was another one that I developed, and because I was playing so much tennis, the sole was wearing out pretty quickly. So I came up with the idea of lacing on a sole so that I would be able to replace one that had holes in it in between matches. And that was pretty convenient because I was in London. I was going to all of my matches on double-decker buses. So what I would do is I would go to the top of a double-decker bus on my way to a match, and I would lace on a new sole right on the back row where no one could see what I was up to. And so that suited. I didn't want to draw any attention to myself, so that suited me just fine. I developed this one. This one was the first one that I sort of created from scratch without cutting up other shoes. And they had a rubber outsole and a zip so that I could zip on new soles as they wore through. So what happened was the tutors, as the project started to get more and more in depth and become a bigger part of my studies, the tutors said that I couldn't base my concept on my Alexander Technique lessons alone, because when you produce a shoe for the market, you have to have a certain amount of evidence that your product has got some proof. It's not just something that you've made up. So I went to the British Library and spent 2 months during the summer of 2000, and no, 2001, sorry. And I started to reluctantly, I wasn't particularly happy about it. I didn't think that I would find very much. I started looking through the scientific literature, and whilst there was an overwhelming amount of papers that were, I felt, biased, because they just seemed to be trying to prove that the latest cushion sole was a bit more injury preventing than last year's one. And whilst that wasn't encouraging, I kept going and managed to find a small number of papers, but consistently over the sort of previous 100 years. And the researchers were pretty unanimously saying that shoes do actually cause a lot of foot ailments and injuries, and people that don't wear shoes are free from a lot of the ailments that we suffer en masse in the West, where wearing shoes is completely normal. So, for example, studies that were done in India and China showed that people that were too poor to wear shoes, or would only wear very simple sandals, they didn't have bunions or hammer toe or flat feet anywhere near as often as we did in the West. So this they put down to the fact that most shoes are too stiff. And as you can see on this picture on the right, it's showing that shoes limit the angle to which the foot flexes. And so naturally it would flex about 55 degrees, but with shoes on, the angle is reduced to about 25 degrees. And some of that is actually accounted for by the fact that the shoe is designed to roll a bit like the rocker on a rocking chair. So the bending of the foot at the ball of the foot is reduced right down, and as a result, it starts to, over a period of time, starts to influence the functioning of the foot and also the way that you walk. It's quite interesting to see when children are learning to walk for the first time. It can be seen that when they get a bit more confident, they are actually going up onto the ball of the foot by this 55 degrees. So that's something that you don't see very often when you watch people out on the high street. Most people aren't walking in the same way. This photo represents another study that was done in China, and they studied lots of people who didn't wear shoes, and they found that, if anything, the people who had the most healthy, perfect feet of everyone surveyed were those pulling rickshaws on the hard cobbled streets. And it's kind of counterintuitive, because most people would think that hard surfaces wouldn't be something that we're naturally evolved to be able to deal with. And so therefore, we need cushioning on the bottom of our feet in order to prevent injuries. But this research is interesting, telling a different story. For anyone who's just joined us, the meeting is going to run out of time in a few minutes. And once the meeting is cut off, we'll join straight back in with the same link and the same password. And we'll carry on as soon as everyone's back in. So yeah, that was an interesting. So the papers are very interesting to read, and they were consistently saying something which I thought was very important, that people needed to know about. An additional thing that I was finding out was that whilst it's quite obvious that shoes that are pointed, they constrict the position of the toes, and so over a period of time they can actually start to cause problems like bunions and maybe ingrowing toenails, and they shape the feet. But what most people don't realize is that the joints at the ball of the foot are designed to expand every time you put weight on them. And that expansion is said to trigger the plantar reflex, which propels the whole body forward and up. So when you put weight onto the foot, the nerve endings can sense that, and it causes a reflex. It's not something that people do automatically. It's not something that people think about. It just is just something that happens automatically. And that's the experience that I was having by doing the Alexander technique, by using the plantar flexion to effortlessly glide around the room. And I felt like the shoe had to be wider at the foot than most shoes, even athletic shoes, allowed for. So also, because the thin sole was so flexible, it allowed the foot to flex much more than it. The thing that I found was that there was so much sensory feedback that that came. Oops. There was so much sensory feedback that came through the shoes that it completely changed the way that I was walking. And whereas normally I would wear through a pair of tennis shoes in maybe a month or two, I found myself being really careful and not scrubbing the ground so much, because I could actually, for the first time, feel what I was doing when my feet were making impact with the ground. And this was changing the way that I moved and the way that I walked and the way that I stood. And it had a very profound effect on all of my movement. So here's some more photos as the product became much more detailed. So I started to make very thin sole units out of rubber. And one thing that people were telling me was that they were concerned that there'd be sharp objects on the ground, maybe hypodermic syringe needles or pieces of glass. And they really didn't want to step on any of those by mistake and have something puncture their foot. So I developed a new technology using a very finely woven Kevlar, so that I could put a very fine layer inside the shoe, and it would protect the user whilst not interfering with the flexibility. And on the bottom here, you can see one of the shoes that incorporated this technology. And the zip at this point is still in the shoe. A bit later on, you'll see that the zip goes away, and that happened when the rubber was developed, because at the moment I was using pretty soft rubber that wasn't durable at all. And as we developed the product, it started to become apparent that the shoes weren't wearing out as quickly, and it really wasn't necessary to have the zip anymore. This was another product, a sort of a sports version with a breathable sock that went inside. And I graduated with these products and decided that I would contact some shoe manufacturers. And at this point, my major goal in life was to play competition tennis. And because I'd graduated, I didn't have access to the college workshops anymore. So I couldn't keep making the soles that I was, getting through. And so I needed a manufacturer to produce it, primarily so that I could continue to play tennis without my injury flaring up. And it was starting to become a problem, because I'd run out of shoes, and every time I wore a conventional tennis shoe, I would end up with another injury. So this was a long process. I didn't have really any form of income. So I was at the time claiming job seekers allowance whilst I wrote to all these companies and not really getting anywhere. I was, for the most part, getting no response at all. It was a difficult time because I didn't really have enough money to, buy healthy food, and I didn't really feel like anyone was valuing what I was bringing to the market. And then something happened that was quite unusual, which was I was playing a tennis match in a prototype shoe, and my opponent noticed at the change of ends that I wasn't wearing a normal tennis shoe. I was wearing something a bit different. And he asked me what I was wearing, and I said, oh, it's a prototype shoe that I created. And what he said was that I should contact the Clark's family, and because he knew that they played tennis, and he gave me the mobile number of Conrad Clark. So I took the mobile number, and at that point I was a bit disheartened. I wasn't very hopeful, and I told my tennis coach at the end of the match. I told him about the match, and I said, oh, and he also gave me his phone number. Well, it turned out that my coach coincidentally knew that chap, because he was one of his former pupils, and in fact he taught the whole Clark's family how to play tennis. So my coach told me that I needed to ring him, and it was very important, and I agreed to do that. A couple of weeks later, and I still hadn't rung the contact, and so my coach said to me, we're going to end the phone call here, and you're going to ring them immediately, and I want you to let me know once you've rung them. Okay. And so if it wasn't for him, it probably would have just remained just an idea that never went anywhere. And what led from there was quite remarkable, because Conrad introduced me to his father, Lance, and his brother, Galahad, who were running a small shoe company called Terraplana. I think the next slide might have something. Yeah. So this is a photo of Lance and Galahad outside of their shoe shop on Bermondsey Street in London. And there you can see at the top the Terraplana logo. So at the time, Terraplana was selling shoes that were for men, and selling for around sort of £150 and up. So reasonably expensive, high-end, very well crafted shoes that were made in Portugal, I believe, by very talented shoemakers. And what I was bringing to the table was a different concept altogether. This was something which was for health, and they brought in their shoemaking experience, and they already had the business set up to make shoes, and I was bringing in this new concept of a new construction that would allow the foot to work as nature intended. So what you can see on the left hand side here is a last. The first thing that we did when we made the shoe was to create a last which determines the overall shape of the shoe. And we went to a professional last makers in Northampton. And once we had got the shape to somewhere where I felt like it was going to work for people's feet, and Galahad felt like it was going to be something that was fashionable enough for people to want to own a pair of these shoes, we set about designing the upper. And ultimately, what I was designing here was a tennis shoe. It was the first thing that I wanted to do, was to make sure that there was a shoe that would pass as a tennis shoe, so that I could continue to wear this product in tennis tournaments. And that's the design. That's why the design here looks the way it does. So a few months later, this was the end product, and this is the one you can see at the top. This was the shoe that I'd always wanted to create, which was a tennis shoe that wouldn't lead to twisted ankles. And underneath is another shoe, which is the same design, but just in different colors. This was the way that we presented the product. The shoe still had the zip at this point. It had a lot of information to do with the way that the body works, and it was really, as much as a piece of product design, it was really education at the same time, helping people to understand why they needed to allow the foot to bend in this way, and why they didn't actually need the thick cushioning and the heels that they were used to wearing. When we sold the shoe for the first time, we had quite a thick little booklet called the Little Red Book. And the Little Red Book had lots of diagrams and pictures to explain to people who had never heard of this concept before why the shoe was going to help you to have better ease of movement and more aligned posture when you stand, because it didn't have a heel. This was another one of the products with just a very simple Velcro design. And this one was the original way that I was making the shoes at the very beginning. And it's kind of, the original Vivobarefoot shoe. So this one brought back a lot of memories for me. And it wasn't necessarily the most fashionable shoe that we ever did. But for me, this one is still one of the ones that looks like, where the idea came from. It's a very special design to me. So we launched the shoe in 2004, about 12 months after I first met the Clarks. And in 2005, the following year, Vivobarefoot brought out their product, available to the general public, and it went one step further, which was to put toes onto the shoe, so that it was really making a statement. And whilst we took we took the approach that we were trying to make the shoe appealing in all situations, because what we felt was that if you had a shoe that you just wore in the gym or just wore at home, but when you went to the office or went out to another occasion where it wouldn't pass to wear a shoe that didn't look like it fitted into that situation, then people's feet just wouldn't have the chance to adapt. So what we wanted, even from the beginning, was to have a shoe that could be used in every single occasion, whether you're at the office, whether you're at the gym, whether you were running a marathon, or just casually on a night out, this sort of thing. So this was a completely different option, and we were surprised when this shoe started selling extremely well, particularly in America, where it really stood out. And as soon as a celebrity would wear a pair of these, they would immediately get in all the papers. And so even today, this product is the one that everyone thinks that I invented, but it's actually one that came after us. But Vivobarefoot, whilst they're a completely separate company to the Clark's own company, they've helped the whole industry become more aligned to the barefoot philosophy. And the profits that came from this shoe helped to fund research, particularly done in Harvard by Daniel Lieberman, who ended up writing an article that got onto the front cover of Nature Journal. So this product deserves a lot of credit. At the same time, I just wish that I'd come up with that idea, or kind of believed that it would be a good design. One of the highlights of the whole journey was when I sent a couple of pairs of shoes to a friend of my tennis coach's, and he actually still is the referee at Wimbledon at the championships. And as a way of saying thank you back, he invited me to come over to the All England Club, and we played a little bit on the practice courts. And this was, one of the best things that could have ever come about, being able to play even on the practice courts. It wasn't center court, but the quality of the surface was just amazing and something I'll never forget. So fast forward a few years and the shoe has really taken off, and it sells hundreds of thousands of pairs every year, and it's pretty well known. And it's really, surprised even myself, because back in the day I knew from my own experience how important this shoe was to me, but I wasn't ever really sure that it would have such a big impact on anyone else, because I didn't know whether my injury was just specific to me. But the number of times people have come up to me and told me that they've overcome an injury that was with them for years and years, and they had given up all hope of recovering. And by switching to the shoe, it's allowed them to somehow over time be able to recover from that. And whilst there's limited scientific evidence at this point, because it's still, the product has been out for 15 years now, but in terms of it being something that sold a lot of volume, we're really talking the last sort of 10 years, and even now is starting to really take off again. So I think what you'll see in the future is lots of science that comes out that surprisingly barefoot shoes are really good for you. But in my eyes, this was always proven from 100 years ago. It's just that, the shoe manufacturers never really figured out a way of profiting from this concept until recent years. And that's why the science kind of has always favored cushion soles. That's my take on the situation anyway. Normally at this presentation, I wanted to show an ad for Vivo, but I don't have that lined up. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to, if people want to unmute themselves, so we keep the background noise to a minimum, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. If anyone's having problems unmuting themselves, you can also raise your hand and I can see if I can do that from my computer.
Hi, Tim. It's Timo. First of all, I'm very honored to to meet you in this virtual reality. Or the fact is that I'm wearing Vivobarefoot for the last 2.5 years, even before I met Richard. So I'm also very pleased to to understand that the son of Richard is also inventor of Vivobarefoot. It's really amazing product. For me, changed a lot of the way how I walk, my guide, and also helped me a lot. I get here in Zagreb in one kind of community of healthy people who are using different approach to the body, and they were very fan of Vivobarefoot. So first of all, Vivobarefoot had the only one barefoot that has 49 number. So I'm 49. Now, fortunately, I'm on 50. After the wearing the shoes, I'm 50 because my feet get a little bit larger than usual. And I also try to play basketball with Vivobarefoot very carefully, because I had 2 surgery on my knees in the last 5 and 6 years. So I had very good experience also playing the basketball, which is a little bit contradictory of standard shoes of, Air Jordan or Air Pumping, or the way how you. So for me, it's very interesting experience to wear Vivobarefoot. I tried also 5 fingers. They also had 50, 49, and 50 numbers. So I bought it, and I tried to take it on the mountain. So I climbed to the mountain with Vivobarefoot and also with 5 fingers, and it's very nice experience. So I don't have nothing to ask you special, but I just want to thank you that you invented such things on the market.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Maybe one question regarding basketball. Do you see that people in the future will realize that this kind of the shoes will be also suitable for the basketball players, which are a little bit,
Yeah.
different way, they are using a little bit more air and reinforced shoes for the playing the games.
Yeah. Well, my experience of tennis, I mean, I think tennis and basketball are similar in the way that the body is used is not the way that you would kind of use the body if it was barefoot. So I think the players are very hard on their feet, and so you can sprint and then stop very quickly. Whereas if you were barefoot, you would naturally take a lot longer and many more strides in order to gradually slow down. So what the shoes seem to be doing is that they are allowing the foot to make very hard impacts with the court, and you're able to get better, stoppage performance. But as a result, I felt like I was overloading my joints. And so when I started playing in Vivo, I had to really learn how to play in a different way. And there wasn't really an option for me because I was just getting injured all the time. But I felt like I could get going into a sprint much easier, but then I wasn't really quite as able. I was like maybe a step short getting back into position. But just over a period of time, I just built that into the way that I play. My feet adapted to that situation, and I mean it was a long process to be able to play tennis in it. And if someone says to me today, I want to play a sport in your shoes, what do you recommend? I always say to them, well, it really depends. The longer that you've worn a cushioned sole, the more chance there is of there being a problem, because you've got to learn how to run from the beginning in a lot of situations, and your feet have also got to have a little bit of time to adapt. The muscles are not used to being used in that way, and there's some tissue on the very bottom of the sole which naturally will build up a fatty layer, and when that's absent, you can more easily get injured that way. There's an idea in basketball that there needs to be really good ankle support, and I would imagine that's because the ankle support helps to prevent ankle injuries. And what my philosophy would be is that if you're using the body in a sensible way, in a shoe which was very minimal, then as soon as the ankle begins to twist, the natural reflexes of the body will protect it, and you'll fall over, but you won't injure yourself. So yeah, there's a long way to go. A lot of see athletes, they like to wear one product and wear it for don't change anything. They want to wear one shoe for their entire career, and if there's a problem with the shoe, then they'll change, but otherwise they want to just stick to what works. And the major manufacturers of shoes, they're all making cushioned soles, and they're all paying a large amount of money to all these players. So we're in a very interesting situation at the moment where I feel like some athletes coming up might start wearing a barefoot product, and gradually there's an opportunity for a really big shift in the whole marketplace.
Thank you. I really agree that you need some time to adapt to start to work in this Vivobarefoot or barefoot anyhow. You really need at least 6-7 months to understand that the way that you're working is different than the previous one. And
yeah. For children, I think that it doesn't require any time at all. As long as the shoe is, I mean, it really comes down to how good the shoe is. If the shoe is good, then they're just like, you don't see a child barefoot running poorly, in my opinion. I think they're great. When you take the shoes off, the child can move really well.
Yes. I'm wearing your shoes, Vivobarefoot, also my suit. So I'm really, I cannot live without it anymore. I really don't use anymore any kind of shoes. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, happy to take any other questions.
Hi, Tim. Thanks so much for your presentation. It was really interesting to hear your story and exactly how you made the shoes. So thank you.
Welcome.
I'm just interested to ask you, many sports shops do something called a gait analysis, and I had one done myself. And I just wondered whether, you know, because they give you shoes that are kind of meant to support the way in which you run, they look at the pronation and supination of the foot. Would that maybe make the habits of the person worse, or would it make their injury or pain worse by having a pair of those types of shoes?
So I asked an Alexander technique teacher that at a congress once, and she said that the orthotics can be really useful in helping someone rehabilitate from an injury, but it was her opinion that she didn't think that it was a permanent solution, and that makes a lot of sense to me. If someone is pronating or running in a way which is not helpful, then maybe an orthotic can help that injury or prevent an injury. At the same time, if you want to regain the optimum health of the foot, there's a lot of factors, but I feel like if it's possible to do it, then it probably would mean at some point stop using the orthotic and allow the foot to start doing what it's naturally designed to do. And for some people, maybe they don't want that, or maybe that, you know, it's going to take too much to do that, and they don't want to go that route. In which case, I think an orthotic, if someone is managing an injury with that and they don't want to do anything else about it, then it's a useful product. But my objective really is to get this way of thinking into children's shoes and have it so that people grow up with their feet working as nature designed, and really they don't know what it's like to wear a cushioned sole or a shoe that is restricting the way that their foot works.
Thank you, that's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, Tim.
Hey.
I have a question. And yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic presentation. And I've literally just come from my chiropodist this morning. And he's always saying to me, you need a very wide toe in your shoe to allow the foot to, the joints, as you were saying, the ball of the joint to spread out when you walk. So I'll have to tell him about you now when I next see him. What I wanted to ask, and he's often mentioned to me about having the split soles. I have some Joust shoes which I use, but like you were saying, you know, I'm always really worried because they're quite light shoes that if I'm walking outside, that I'm going to actually step on something sharp, you know. So I'm a bit of a wimp about doing that. And you mentioned about the sort of cushioning, the layer of fat on the sole of the foot. Does that come does that build up if you stop wearing shoes so much, or stop wearing like really heavy shoes? I mean, have we made our feet like a little bit more flimsy from wearing heavy shoes? Like I used to wear Doc Martens, but I think I'm now going to stop wearing them, even though I love them, because I feel like I've actually done less with my foot and and it's shaped the way I walk.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that the foot is really representation of the way that we're using our foot. It's the same with every part of the body. And if you have a shoe with a nice soft insole, then you're going to reduce the capacity for the foot to build up that fat layer, I believe. Because I think what does it is impact. I mean, the impact is something that people tend to think that we want to reduce it as much as possible. And at least in terms of some aspects of the body, and I know that bone growth is controlled by impact. So I think it's the same with the fatty layer on the bottom of the foot, that if you start to moderate impact by having these soft layers, then the body gets the message that that fat layer is not really necessary. and it doesn't build it up. Now, as soon as you start taking your shoes off and walking, or walking in a shoe which doesn't have that cushioning, in my experience, is that layer of fat gradually builds up. It's not something that you notice one day you've suddenly got it, but maybe after a few months you start to realize that your foot was never like this before, and it feels very natural, but just more comfortable.
Great, thank you very much. That's very helpful.
One other thing that you reminded me of is there's particular aspects of the shoe which I'm very sensitive to, where the constriction becomes really apparent, and I think having the width of the foot, the width of the shoe at the ball of the foot, that's one area that I touched on, and also another area is where the toes are allowed to go. Specifically the big toe, but I think in all the toes, because if there's something in the way of where a toe naturally wants to go, then you'll start walking in a way which is going to limit that contact with that part of your shoe. And in some cases, if the big toe is being pulled in, I feel like you're going to not want to use that joint so much because the joint is out of alignment. So I'm a big fan of allowing the big toe to be as straight as it possibly can be. And at that point, as a designer, I'm also aware that people tend to go for the opposite, that they want the shoes to be kind of pointed somewhat. And so you've got a bit of a contradiction. But where fashion comes up against the anatomy of the body, as a designer, I think that fashion needs to give way.
I agree. I totally agree. I have a bunion on my left foot from doing point works, ballet dancer. So weirdly, it just never happened on my right foot. So I don't know whether bunions are hereditary or they're from just, not good fitting shoes, or a bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's some evidence that shows it's hereditary, but I think the shoe, in my eyes, if someone's got a bunion, the first thing that I'm thinking of is what shoes are being worn. And they're very, the ideal remedy for a bunion is to not have one in the first place. And for that, you need to get young people wearing really fashionable barefoot shoes.
Awesome.
Okay.
I would like to say something. Hi,
Sure.
everybody. Yeah, hi, Tim. That was brilliant, just brilliant story. And from my point of view, from point of physiology and anatomy, everything that you say stands. And I don't believe how people doesn't see that, and how is it that more and more people doesn't believe that, because it is like that. So I think you are doing a great job. And this idea, when you have the shoe that is on the ankle, so to say, you it's hard to explain. You don't give the ankle the possibility of what the ankle is designed for, so to say. So we have to abandon that kind of thinking and those kinds of shoes, so to say. So yeah. That's it. Yeah. So yeah, great presentation and great work. So yeah.
Thank you. I think with the ankle support, the way that sports people use their bodies is not natural, and I don't think it's ever going to be natural. And really, they're just trying to push the body to the very highest level without getting injured. And so I feel like the barefoot philosophy, it makes complete sense if what you're after is to have healthy feet, healthy body, take care of your body, have it work as well as it possibly can do. As soon as you start thinking about sports, it may be the case that athletes want to just wear their bodies out for 10 years and then their career is finished, but they got what they wanted. It's if people can make use of this to overcome injuries, then I think that's a great thing. That's what I did. I didn't play tennis at a professional level, so you know, it remains to be seen. I think probably it can do really good things in running, where you're just going in a straight line. It's much more natural. But when it comes to basketball, tennis, a lot of other sports that you have to change direction a lot, I think maybe some of the concepts can be brought in, but it remains to be seen.
Yeah, I understand.
I had my system freeze up a little bit, so I could have missed this. But I'm in the U.S. and I say want to look and see where I can go and try some of these on and so forth. Does it have a different name than it used to have, your shoes? Has there been a name change?
Yes, I should have pointed out that the name of the shoe has always been called Vivo, but it was originally made by Terraplana. About, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, it was several years ago, the whole company changed its name to Vivobarefoot. So if you want to check the shoes out, you need to go to vivobarefoot.com. And the shoes are predominantly sold online. You might be lucky to live near a stockist, but the way that most people go about it is that they try the shoes on somewhere or order them online, and once they figure out what size they are, then they just order online from then on.
I'm used to European size shoes. Do these run large or small, can you say?
It depends. Like sometimes that changes. Normally for me is I order like an extra size up, but with the style, sometimes that changes, and over a period of time, sometimes they resize the lasts. So you got to maybe ask the customer services for that. Okay, I've just had another message saying that the meeting has got another 9 or 10 minutes. But happy to take questions until the end.
I'd like to say something, Tim.
Yep.
So many people have said almost identical things as Evo in workshops. But it's really nice to have someone say those things and you be present to hear them.
Yeah.
People just come up to me raving about them. Oh, the best thing that's happened. Oh, they feel so comfortable. I walk better. And I can say the same thing as well, because I just can't wear anything else now. My body's got used to it. And if I put any sort of shoes on that's not barefoot, they feel like very heavy and clog-like, and I can feel the way they change the walking. So yeah, so I appreciate it as well.
Oh, thanks, Dad.
And thanks for the talk as well. Great.
You're welcome. Yeah, I've been talking to people on Instagram. So what's happening on Instagram is interesting, because there's a number of people who are wearing Vivo, and they're saying, they're saying to me privately, "Thank you for inventing this shoe," and they're telling a story which is very similar to my story and to other people's stories. And so it seems like there's definitely a certain amount of people who really do need a shoe which is like this. And I think sometimes it's an injury, sometimes it's just that their feet are just not comfortable in whatever way, but it is commonly said that they can't wear anything else. And so with all of this, what it just strikes me is there needs to be an affordable version of the shoe. I always wanted the shoe to be not something that could be afforded by people who had the money, but cost just the same as the most affordable shoes on the market. So I don't feel like this project is anywhere near finished until, number one, there's a shoe which costs 50 euros or 50 pounds, and number two, it's being worn by all the young kids and allows complete freedom of movement. So this is just the beginning in my book. And then there's also the same thing to be done for the furniture industry as well, because we're all sitting on chairs most likely, which aren't really the best thing for our body. So in time, I'd like to look back and wonder how we ever managed with all these crazy shoes and pieces of furniture that we use at the moment.
Can I say something?
Hey, Leslie.
Thank you. Hi, Tim. Thank you. And we had this conversation, and I was going to remind you about a little bit cheaper shoes for my children, please. Because actually, I mean, I didn't even think I needed these shoes. And yeah, but my body knows, and these shoes are the best.
Yeah.
Just the best. And I'm very impressed that people, how did you find them? You know, we can't find them here in Ireland. And I think Richard told me you have a shop in there. Don't know.
Okay.
Is that a question for, who's that question for?
For Ivo or yourself, did you know that they had a shop?
I bought it from Vivobarefoot.com, so I bought it online.
Ah, okay. No, maybe I misunderstood, because I think Richard told me that in Ljubljana there was a shop.
I know that there is in Ljubljana, but I never been there, so
yeah.
I bought it from online.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get what you meant. Yeah, it is. There is a shop. It's not a Vivobarefoot shop, but half the shop window is dedicated to Vivo.
Okay.
And it's in near the river, but just behind the river. Or I don't know whether it's north side, I think, towards the castle. There's a long road, and if anyone from Ljubljana is there, they can just walk around the road or just type in Vivobarefoot Ljubljana, and I'm sure you'll find the shop.
And then for Tim, so how do you think, are you making any steps towards those cheaper shoes?
Yeah, with the price of the shoes, because of the way the shoe has been sold, it's sold mostly online, and because the amount of marketing that has to happen in order to, you know, keep growing the industry, the shoes are expensive because of those two things. For every pair of shoes that you buy, a certain amount of that money has to go towards educating more people, you know, why they need to be wearing shoes like this. And with shoes, the ones that are sold on the high street are at an advantage because of the way that they're delivered. So a shoe that's delivered, you know, in bulk to an online a high street retailer will always be cheaper than if you're delivering individual pairs of shoes to individual customers, if you see what I mean. So there's restrictions. I don't think Vivo are going to be able to reduce the price too much on the children's shoes, maybe on all the others as well, because that's their business model. So I think in order for things to move forward, it really is up to the companies that have already got shoes selling in the high street stores to start picking up this philosophy and start doing it that way. So that's my thought on that.
And could you sell your design to others or not?
Well, that's something that I'd love to come up with some more concepts and you know, approach these other manufacturers. So maybe watch the space on that one. But I think it's really important. I mean, it's great that we've, you know, got the market that we have, but this is just like scratching the surface, and things really are not going to shift too much unless children's shoes are really affordable and they work brilliantly.
Oh yeah.
Which, yeah.
My children love them, but you know, my money's don't love them.
And they wear them out. They wear them out, don't they, in crazy ways.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Tim. Thank you very much for telling me about these shoes. I heard a lot about them at the center, but I never tried them, so it's wonderful. I just tried to get online, and there's quite a bit of styles that are sold out.
Yeah.
So are they something we have to look for and just order and wait, or how does that work?
Yeah. So Vivobarefoot is going through a big growth period recently before COVID. So it was quite common for the shoes to be just sold out. Like this time last year, they couldn't keep them in stock. And that's kind of a sign that, you know, that it's difficult to predict the growth in this business. So in the past, when they've tried to predict growth, they've manufactured a certain amount of shoes, and if they don't sell them, then they've got a really difficult cash flow problem to solve. So what they end up doing is, if no matter how positive the predictions seem, they can only kind of limit themselves to, you know, growing a certain amount, because they don't want to be back in that situation of you know, thousands of pairs of shoes. Okay, so what I was saying was that the shoes are sold out. It's normal for them to be sold out, and the reason why is because the shoes are growing at a very rapid rate, and in order to manufacture large amounts of shoes that are kind of continually growing, if they make the predictions wrong in some way, then the company could go out of business. So yeah, it can be really frustrating for people to be continually checking the website, and for the shoe to always be sold out, and to not have any answers as to when it's going to be back in stock and this sort of thing. But yeah, I know the reasons why that is, and I know it doesn't help people to get a pair of shoes more easily, but that's just the situation that they're in at the moment. I think with COVID, what's happened is they've had to lay off a certain amount of staff, and so I think immediately that lockdown started, they knocked 20% off of all of the shoes in order to make sure that they weren't going to have a cash problem. So it could well be the case that following this video that it's really difficult to get a hold of a pair. But you can also try different outlets. Maybe Amazon will have some, or different online retailers. But yeah, it's not even with my kids. As soon as I see that they've got certain thing in stock, I have to think ahead and try and get some as soon as possible.
I might just say that I think Joanne, you were answering her question, and she just left, and I told her in the WhatsApp that we are back. But
all right, well, I've recorded it, so if she wants to check it out later on and get the full answer, then
because she's saying in the WhatsApp that she's going to get she's going to order a pair as soon as possible.
Great, that's good news.
Yeah.
So I must have done a good job.
Yes, very good. We are still waiting on the chair as well, or whatever.
Yeah, I need a chair. This one is no good, the one that I'm sitting in.
I tell my friends that these are because some of my friends, they come like, oh, look at my shoes, and I say, yeah, these are the Alexander Technique shoes. And and they look at me like, ah. But the last time I had to go to London to get them, and but I'm so happy with them even now. I have a new pair. Super. So thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
I'm mute now.
I just want to say thank you for everyone being on the call. I'm sure that you've got a lot on with all the disruption, and to be able to tell you the story and connect with you guys, I've really enjoyed myself, and so thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Really good. Anytime.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you very much. It's been very interesting.
Glad to hear that.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. That's really good.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Yeah. Okay. Can I just say something about the next meeting next week?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It's just to let people know, it's Glenna Batson. She gave a talk last month, and she's giving it's not so much a talk, it's more a practical demonstration about how the skeleton supports the body. So it's fairly anatomical, but I'm sure it'll be very good as well. So yeah, looking forward to that. I'll send everyone a link. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, perfect.
And just to say, there's a couple of people from Austria and a couple of people from Hungary who joined the meeting this time. So just want to welcome them as well. Okay. So have a really good week, everyone.
You too.
Okay.
Thanks, Dad. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay.
Bye for now.
Yeah. Bye.
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 Goodbye.
Bye.